Ricci Show. We're live.
All right. Good afternoon. This is PJ Norwood, Frank Ricci, and Justin McCarthy. Welcome to today's Fire Engineering Google Hangout. Today we have Justin here. We're going to talk about his FDIC class and the Fatal 5. But before we get started, we want to put a shout out to our good friend Chris Pepler. Chris Pepler, Assistant Chief in Torrington Fire Department, has recently undergone a surgery for some mouth cancer. Instead of going into the details of what he's enduring and what he's going through in his experience, we ask you to reach out to Chris Pepler on Facebook and send him your wishes and say a few prayers for him. He needs it right now. He's in the hospital. He's recovering. He's doing remarkably well for what he's going through. But he's been in the fire service for quite a long time. He's never smoked, never used any tobacco products, and he ended up developing mouth cancer. Well, cancer is real, as we all know, and at different times during our careers it touches us in different ways. And this time it's touched us very closely with Chris. So we would appreciate you saying some prayers for him. Reach out on Facebook, read about his story. He put it out there for all of us to learn from, and thank him for putting his story out there and try making a difference today in how you work on the fire ground and how those who work for you work on the fire ground to keep them safe. Right?
I went and I saw Chris the other day, and it was it was real troubling. And I think we were joking around when we said I never thought I'd be glad to hear Chris talk, because he was looking at the prospect of not being able to ever talk again. So that was really disconcerting, but he is talking. They did have to remove part of his tongue, and they're looking at the rest of his neck now. And Chris is a great instructor. I actually took his class last year at FDIC, so hopefully we'll see him back at FDIC, but he's going to need some speech therapy, and he's going to need some kind words and some prayers from his friends, but it is heartening to see that he's doing good. I can see that the fire service is alive and well. I went into his hotel room. From New Haven, I would bring pizza to the hospital, but you can't bring pizza to a guy who has throat cancer. So I bought him an elephant, and then I looked, and his shift at the work, they drew this big card that looked like fifth graders did it, with like paste on fire trucks and big letters. So it was a little heartwarming, but he's got a little guy too, Nathan. So he's 7 years old. I think he got an email address out of it because he wanted to be able to communicate with his dad. So, but it's a sad thing. But we wish Chris really all the best.
And we know Chris. He's a fighter. He's not going to bow down to this. He's going to fight. He's going to fight strong, and in the end, he's going to be okay. But you could still use your prayers at this point, and reach out Facebook, send him a message, and just tell him you're thinking about him. We would appreciate that. So, I want to ask you that today before we get into our topic and Justin McCarthy.
Yeah, and I'd just like to make a side note that Anthony Kastros was going to come on today, but he caught a wave. The surf was up, so we're going to get him the next time. But today we have Justin McCarthy, and he put in for a class at FDIC on the Fatal 5. And, the government spends a lot of money with NIOSH doing line-of-duty death reports. But the fact of the matter is I think you can go in any fire department in America, and you could sit down a couple knowledgeable people around the table and say, all right, write a line-of-duty death report for your department. And I bet you they'll probably come up with the 5 and some other things that need to be improved. Maybe it's an idea. Is to do an audit of your department and say, hey, there was a fatality at one of our structure fires. What went wrong? And I bet you that even without actually going to that structure fire, I bet your officers and your firefighters could pick the things that could go wrong, and maybe that's a good place to start for the training. But without further ado, Justin, why don't you tell us a little bit about the concept for your class, how it came about, and where you're going? Because it's been you, Anthony Kastros, Mike Galeano, and a couple guys that have been pushing the Fatal 5. So can you enlighten us?
Absolutely. First, let me just say, Chris Pepler, best wishes. Chris actually got me involved in teaching in the state of Connecticut, so I owe a real lot to him, and we wish him the best. And I'm going to go see him next week, so send your prayers. Yeah, Frank, I actually was out teaching and bumped into Mike Galeano, and we were talking about different topics in the fire service and some hot topics that were out there, and we got to talking about this Fatal 5. And we were just passing ideas off of each other, and this all came up. And basically what we were finding is everybody knows PJ and I do our radio show, and we get the line of duty death at the end of it. And we kept seeing over and over and over again, no matter what, the same topics coming up and the same recommendations from NIOSH. And you would read reports and you would see recommendation after recommendation after recommendation, but they were all the same. And every department, myself having worked for 3 different departments just in the state of Connecticut, ranging from 400-person departments that do 30,000 calls a year to smaller departments that are doing 1,500 calls a year that I was a member of with 6 people on shift covering a huge area. They all suffer from all the things that we're seeing in these reports. And just to go off the top, communications, we'll start there. Communications being one of the biggest things that pops up on these NIOSH reports over and over again. And everybody thinks communications, they think being able to talk to each other, being able to come across with accurate information. And that's just a little bit of it. It expands from there to communication systems, how things are dispatched, how calls are received, how the crews are being dispatched out. And then from there, once we get on scene, how well communications are managed by teams. And I know you guys both work for departments that do a significant volume of calls. Is this something that you would say you would agree with?
I completely agree. Communication, breakdown of communication, always seems to be an inherent problem on structure fires. And what we see in New Haven is definitely, all 5 of these things, we were the cardinal sins, and we were committing them at every fire. And I'd say in the last 2-3 years, we've really kind of turned the corner, and I could say that we're making good progress in addressing some of these issues. We had a lot of talking before, but not a lot of communicating. And a lot of times people think that talking equates to communication, or you can give a great radio report, but if it's not acknowledged, you're not actually communicating. So maybe you want to speak to that.
That's exactly where I was going to go with it, is talking doesn't mean communicating. You hit the nail on the head there. People are constantly talking on radios. We have people who think they put fires out with the radio, and that's okay if that's what they're used to, as long as what they're doing is being relayed to the right people and the jobs are being accomplished. If you speak and no one answers you, or if you're somebody who's an abuser of the microphone, it goes to the Jim Duffy saying dimwit. Does it matter what I'm transmitting? And if it does, are the right people hearing it? And PJ, I'm sure, right next door.
And I think it even goes back even deeper. I think when we think of communication issues with the Fatal 5, we're thinking of the systems, the dispatchers, the radios, how we communicate in the fire ground. But I have a theory that it goes back even deeper than that. Our failure of communication starts in the firehouse. It starts from the chief's office to the company officers to the firefighters. I think we do a poor job on a whole communicating every day. I think we get into, especially as officers, and we're all officers here, that at times it's easier not to communicate with somebody in the firehouse and maybe look past an issue than address an issue. All too often I see too many officers tell somebody what they know they want to hear instead of telling them what they need to hear. And I think that is creating a subculture of lack of communication within the firehouse that rolls over to the fire grounds. It may not be related. It's just my theory.
No, but in the firehouse, most firefighters in this country think they work for the FBI, and I can't figure out. There's nothing we do in the fire service that's a secret. Okay, maybe with EMS, you don't want to release somebody's name because of HIPAA or a medical report. That's sensitive information. But what I found is that 99% of the stuff that they think is secret, it's not. If you want to keep secrets, work for the police department. It's the fire department. We should be sharing ideas and information. We used to have a chief officer who used to always call the company officer aside to talk to him and kind of put the crew out. And I think I used to get him mad because he would always call me aside and tell me useless information or information that was needed but wasn't a secret.
That everybody needs.
That everybody needed. And I would just turn around and say, hey guys, the chief said, and I would repeat everything he said, and he would get mad. It's like it's not a secret. What's the secret? It's because people think, Chief Jost used to say this, he used to quote John Mayer, if people have all the information, they can bend it the way they want, and I think we do need to do a better job communicating.
So I think it starts a little bit earlier, and we could wrap it up with this, is that I think, yes, we do have a failure of communications in the fire ground for a whole host of reasons, from dispatch to our systems to our processes, but I think that we need to do a better job of service communicating in the firehouse, communicating each and every day, making sure that if I say something that it's understood and I get that feedback back and we echo and we have that loop of understanding that it's called, and that will translate to the fire ground.
So this takes me right to the fact that I just actually watched, and for anybody who's watching one of these Google Hangouts, the TED Talks. There's actually a General Petraeus TED Talk where he goes into great detail how the military used to keep everything a secret, and they were finding that they weren't as successful as they could have been. From there, they opened up their communication. They started sharing knowledge. They started talking about things. companies from different areas were talking to companies about things they had never spoken about before, and they were building training off of it. And this goes exactly to what we're talking about, where if we get everyone together, you know, no matter how big your job is, whether it's a small volunteer department with 15 people, like the one I'm going to teach with tonight, or it's a 400-person department, somebody has experience, somebody's seen something that somebody else hasn't. And that's how you build great training, is by cross-referencing each other's experiences.
And the chief's got to realize that when you have 4 divisions, when you're getting that information, they're the day workers for the most part, and they have to ensure the continuity of the message gets disseminated the same way for all the shifts. And I'll just take it back from a union standpoint, is I'm always, you know, getting the job done, but I didn't spend enough time in the firehouses, and a couple of people told me, hey, you got to start getting your message out in firehouses, because if you don't, somebody will make up the message for you. And that's what I find. People just make up stuff. Firefighters, we got a lot of time on our hands. You can't even blame them. But now that I'm getting into the firehouses, I'm able to speak with more continuity, and people are starting to understand the message. So I think that the chiefs play a role in the operational realities of the fire department to make sure all the shifts are on the same page.
One of the great things that I heard, just to spin this off in a slightly different direction, one of the great things I heard was that there was a department locally that had a lot of rumor mill. And they were finding that the chief's office was meeting, they were disseminating information to chief level officers on the division or the shift to then disseminate out again. And by the time the 4th division had gotten it, or the fourth group had gotten it, it was a completely different message from the 4th. You know, it's the classic telephone game.
The school bus game.
Exactly. So what they decided to do is they came out with a weekly newsletter. And what it did was it simply told what the chief's office was working on. It was a 1-page document. What the chief's office was working on, what grants they were working on. They were big on grants. They were working on grants at the time. They were talking about what training was upcoming, not specific dates, but hey, this is what we're working on for the, you know, this is what you're going to be expected to do by the end of the week, the end of the month, the end of the semester, however you want to break it down, and then any other pertinent information. And once a week, they would come out with this. Each chief wrote a little blurb, and it was typed up, and all 4 divisions got the same copy. So now when the message goes out, it's the same message to everyone. They found that the rumor mill of what training was coming up, who was getting, awarded something down the road, who was, you know, working on this grant, what grant money was coming in. It cut it all in the bud, and they found that people became much more driven because they knew what to expect.
Now, if you're listening to this and you're saying, well, this isn't about the fire ground, and the fatal find is about the fire ground, you will see that if your department communicates better in the firehouse level, it translates. It translates right to the fire ground.
It translates right into, I do a lot of teaching with the Fire 1 and Fire 2 programs. You have to get them involved with each other so that they become comfortable with each other. One of the things that we do is we bring in one of the class members to be a lead instructor, or to be a lead, and fill in that void, even if it's just for PT. That gets them comfortable talking, gets them comfortable talking and interacting with each other. So now you translate that into coming up with a game plan in their groups for live burn day, talking to each other in a smoke-filled environment. It builds that camaraderie, which then translates into better communication on the fire ground, and it's all fluid across the board. If you're not talking to each other because you're on your cell phone in the day room, why are you going to talk to each other in a smoke-filled environment until you panic? If you're interacting and you're talking, it just builds. Now you have better continuity, and you have to have an officer that sets this mold, that relays the information properly.
Now, for the chief officers out there, you like the idea of the newsletter, I'm going to give you a suggestion to kick it up a notch. Go with a video, very similar to what we're doing here, and transmit it through your internet, transmit it through your email. Because one issue that I see with a traditional newsletter is you can't see body language. You can't understand tone. I think our body language says a lot. So you can do a 5 or 10 minute little video link each and every week, or once a month, or quarterly, communicating to the department, and you can send it out. And I also think that, you know, firemen, we're more apt to sit down in front of the computer or our phones or somewhere and just watch a 5 or 10 minute video from the chief's office than actually read a whole document that's a newsletter. So just another spin on it to increase or enhance your firehouse communication, which will absolutely roll over to the fire grounds.
Oh, I totally agree. And I think that, like we said, this kind of takes us right into our next one, which is SOPs and SOGs.
Before we get into SOPs and SOGs, I think that something with communication has to be said, and I think it really helps. And I'll give Chief Marcarelli in New Haven a lot of credit, because New Haven's new to incident command. We're new to SOPs. Hell, we're new to everything. So that's good. We're at the infantile stage. We're exactly 20 years behind everybody else. But we're doing some things right. One of the things is that when you listen to radio communications, it's not just enough to critique it after the call, because things just get lost and habits start to get built. And one thing that I really appreciate that Chief Marcarelli does is he has no problem straightening out communications while he's on the radio. So, for example, if somebody talks to command instead of going through the division officer, he won't wait for the critique, because you got to straighten out communications before something goes wrong. He'll just matter-of-factly come on the radio and say, command to Engine 11, Engine 11, you report to Division 2, Division 2 reports to me. And what it does is, it's a lesson for everybody listening to the radio, because nobody wants to be Engine 11 and be that guy called out. But what it does is it's a teaching tool, and that's how you start correcting the behavior. And if command, and I'll go right into SOPs, if they talk to people based off their function and assignment, it makes everything clearer. We had 2 hikers supposedly in distress the other day, and I was able to get close enough to them quick enough the other day, and I commandeered a police vehicle, drove them on the baseball field so we could use the PA to ask them to raise their hand if they were in distress. But before I did that, I got on the radio and said, Car 81 to command, I'm in line with the hikers. Would you like me to use the PA to see if they're in distress? And he came back and he said, yes, I'm sending somebody to your location. From now on, you're going to be safety. When Car 34 gets there, report to the top of the mountain. So by him saying that over the radio, okay, now Car 81 safety, everybody knows. So people are afraid to give direction over the radio as chiefs, and if you start doing that on your run-of-the-mill call, there was no stress on the call the other day, and your basic bread and butter fire, you'll see that you won't have to say it when things are going bad or when we're getting that job and everything's real complicated and they can't find the seat of the fire. So I think Chief Marcarelli does a great job with that.
I think so too, and I've heard it. I've had it happen to me. One of the things, I've been in that hot seat, and for me it was simply missed. I was in actual firefight at the time, missed that a division officer had been assigned to us, and as a result, I was corrected on the air, but now I knew, okay, there is a division chief on this floor. I am aware of it. I simply missed it because, as everybody knows, things get lost on the fireground, and that goes to what I think you said, PJ, is, or Frank, when you do speak, you need to make sure that it's heard, and you need to make sure that it's acknowledged.
And understood.
Yeah, and understood.
Yeah, so that's not really calling somebody out. It's setting the tone for your operations. And chief officers, battalion chiefs, if you do that, I think you're going to be successful and get better communications. I like to give everybody something that they can take away and try.
And I like what you said. It's done most effectively when it's done under no stress. When you're at the AFA, when you're at the hiker call that really isn't a call.
Correct.
You know, that's when it's done. It's not done when you have 3 houses on fire and everybody's in scream mode. You know, and that's not when we start to iron out the problems. We start to iron out the problems in the firehouse, and from there we build on them on these routine calls.
Absolutely. Now let's move into SOPs.
So getting into SOPs, you know, lack of or improper or however you want to word it. You know, one of the things that I know we suffered from in New Haven was outdated SOPs. We had outdated SOPs for a very long time. It took a long time, going right back to Chief Marcarelli and the training staff that's down at the school. They've built SOPs that have become very effective. We've had to modify SOPs, but we are sticking to the SOPs. And we're making sure that all the new company officers on our job, as an example, personally looking in, we have to make sure that they're followed and they're followed properly. And we also have to ensure that they're a guideline. And if somebody goes outside of the guideline, we need to look at why and turn it into a training bulletin. Why did you do X, Y, and Z that varied? Well, if it's a good move, let's use it as a training. If it's a bad move, let's use it as a training. All right? But SOPs need to be structured. They can't be 6 pages long and reflect every single call that could possibly happen, because we're never going to get that accomplished. But we need to have proper, direct SOPs that are adhered to, followed, and that there's ramifications for not following. Now, I'm not saying punitive and punishment and everything else, but there needs to be something that instills I need to make sure that I follow these.
You know, like you mentioned, outdated SOPs. We utilize SOGs, not SOPs, so it hits that guideline piece you're referring to. And I like to look at, you know, so many departments you see, they design an SOP or an SOG and they put it in the book and put it on the shelf, and that's it. They never revisit it. We could never design an SOP or an SOG for every call that we go to, nor can they be perfect, because no two calls are ever the same. A fire at 2.5 wood today is going to be different than a fire at 2.5 wood right next door tomorrow. They're never the same, so we can never, you know, put, you know, I don't like the procedure where it's going to be this way every time. I like to use the word guideline where you have options. You know, if you look at your water supply, you have options. You're going to lay in, or you're going to reverse out, or you're going to pull to the front and you're going to tack off of your tank water. You know, there needs to be options for every piece of our job. But again, like I said, it has to be consistent. All the members have to be trained on them. They should be, I hate to say tested, but we need to make sure that they understand that they're competent to the SOGs or SOPs. And again, it comes down to, I know one of the next 5 is training. It comes down to really making sure we're proficient at our actions and what we do, but also they're not boilerplate. I can't take New Haven Fire Department's SOPs or SOGs, change the heading on it, and put it in my department. It doesn't work. They have to be for your fire department, for your resources, and for your people. And they have to, you know, we work in a dynamic environment, so there's no silver bullet.
One of the biggest issues that I see with the SOPs across the country is that they put in these great SOPs with, you know, they mean very well, but the SOPs in New Haven, we had the problem. They don't reflect the operational realities that the department faces. So you need to take a look at your SOPs periodically, hopefully at least annually, and go through them and say, are we really doing this? Because if we're not really doing it, then get rid of the SOP, because it's actually hurting the entire thing. Because if you have one SOP in there that isn't followed, and the chiefs don't follow it, and the officers don't follow it, well, what it does is it actually taints the entire...
It undermines the foundation.
There you go. That's exactly what I was looking for. It undermines the foundation of the entire document. So it's got to be realistic, and it's got to be followed. And for our officers out there, you got to remember that if an SOP is in place, and your SOPs meet your operational realities, training division is training you on those SOPs, when you deviate from the SOP, that's when you have to communicate to the chief officer. And I'll give you 2 examples. State Street Fire. One of the third due engine companies, it was happened to be a squad, saw a victim in the 2nd floor. So they made a move to make the rescue. Great move. However, you're deviating from the SOP. I'm not saying the move's wrong, but you have to communicate that the third due engine, or that first due squad, that's third due, is making the rescue. So now the battalion chief knows, okay, I have a squad company going to the 2nd floor. I need to cover that third due engine company assignment. So it's very critical that stuff is communicated. Whaley Avenue fire, we had an engine company stretched short coming around back, so there was no line in an adjoining exposure where the fire was exposing to. They told the battalion chief, but the battalion chief never relayed over the radio because they did a face-to-face. So now we have companies operating on the fire floor, some making a search in the exposure apartment where we got fire, thinking that a line's coming, but because that line stretched short around, having that bit of information can actually possibly prevent some injury or death. So it's important that if the SOPs get changed because circumstances dictated action, and I think PJ said it best, is that no fire is the same. If you're going to deviate from the SOP, then it has to be communicated to command, and it has to be broadcasted over the radio so the assignments can be covered. It's about covering blind spots.
You brought up a great point, too, and not to immediately go back to the communication piece that we already covered, but one of the things that I cover in my Mayday class that I've done at FDIC the last couple of years is things need to be answered on the radio like we talked about, especially things like a Mayday or that somebody's coming up short. Face-to-face is always ideal, but it's only between those 2 people. And you might have 20 other people operating on scene that don't know that there's somebody trapped, that don't know that there's, what companies are going to be doing what that's going to deviate, like you said. So this piggybacks on that communication, right?
I think you said you don't want to go back to communication, but what I think we need to understand is each one of these fatal fives is like the spokes in the wheel.
Exactly.
Each one is connected, and any failure in any of them fails the whole foundation.
Right.
And the piece we haven't discussed, and it's a communications issue, but it's also an SOG.
Wait, do we got a foundation or do we got a wheel? I like both.
We have
scenarios,
both.
But you can't go.
It's like trust construction. It's like trust construction.
I'm just a rat.
Is the piece that we've missed, I think, is our dispatchers. We have to make sure that our SOGs also involve our communication staff back in their communication center, so they know when something is missed. Like you mentioned, a Mayday. If a Mayday is missed by the incident commander, what is their role?
Right.
What is their role? What should they do? If there is a transmission of a company and they give their location and that's their last known location, your dispatcher should have that down. So your SOPs, your SOGs should include your communication staff, because it goes back to communications from the beginning. Communications is a whole system of everybody understanding each other's roles, responsibilities, and then the SOP should govern how each of us work within that system.
Well, one of the great things that just happened I work at one of the busier companies in the city, and one of the things that they've been doing is rotating the dispatchers they were call takers, they're becoming dispatchers, so they're moving from simply answering the phones, taking the 911 calls, to actually communicating with us on the air and dispatching the alarms and monitoring us on fires. They're coming and riding with us
That's phenomenal.
to see what actually goes on, and things like, why are we asking for more information on, say, a call with a violent person? Why are they, if they're going on a box alarm for smoke in the building, they get there and there's no audible alarm, why are they asking certain questions? So now these dispatchers aren't sitting in a room with no windows, completely clueless to what we're doing out there. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of great dispatchers out there, but there are also a lot of dispatchers out there that haven't ever seen that side of it.
They need our DVD. They need fire engineering.
Well,
Mayday for dispatch DVD.
I like that.
That was clever. I like
piece,
that. How
you know
you
what I mean?
just
That's
swooped
it,
right
like,
in. That was,
required reading or required watching for all, and that's part of the package that the three of us worked on a couple years ago with our DVD.
absolutely.
That the dispatch center and the communications center, or our actual dispatchers, are like the forgotten piece of our service. Except when there's a problem, we'll want to blame them first for making an error,
Right.
but we forget about them in our critical incident stress debriefings. We forget about them to train them in our Maydays. We forget to include them in our policies and procedures. You know what? They're sitting in a temperature-controlled environment with a system that they could rewind the tape. So if I'm as incident commander missed the Mayday, or I don't hear all of the Mayday, the dispatcher can rewind the tape, listen, and then give me that information. They're a huge resource that we've underutilized.
But that's got to be worked into your SOPs and your department's SOGs, and you need, again, to make sure that they're actually using them, they're realistic, and that they also match your staffing.
Yes.
Some SOPs are written for Detroit or Washington, D.C. or New York City staffing, and they're a small
There's
department.
6 people showing
and
up
they're
on
not
scene.
calling out. Are you an exterior department? There are some departments out there that don't want to call for help. Well, if you don't want to call for help to your scene, then you might as well admit it that you're an exterior department. If you want to save people and save property and do the mission of the fire department the way it should be done, then you have to be able to call for help. It's great to say on a piece of paper that you have a RIT team, but if you don't actually have a RIT team, then why do you have an SOP that says it? It's almost like they see the standard, which most of the standards are a joke when you come to the OSHA law, 2 people for a RIT team, and then they write it so that they have 2 people, but those 2 people really don't exist on the fire. So they got to be willing to call for the help to support the SOP and to support the mission.
I have some experience in a smaller department. We had SOPs that were great, but like you said, the staffing didn't take into account, or the SOP didn't take into account the staffing. So they've since relied on automatic aid, which I think is a great system. For them, if they quadranted it out to town, certain area responders are going to go to the town firehouse, and they'll cover that. Some are going to go to the scene for water supply. Some are going to go to the scene for RIT, and depending on what quadrant they are, that's the precedent. RIT takes number 1, water supply number 2, and then station coverage would be 3. 4 is kind of like your reserve team. They're there when you need them, and that's kind of like your second alarm crew. You can start moving people up and in. It took a long time. This is within the last 10 years that this system's been put in place, because prior to that, they had all 6 people on crew or on shift designated something. Well, you're going to eat up 6 people doing things like getting a line in place, getting the pumping gear, making sure that there's a hydrant if it's a hydrant area, and then having an incident commander. When they wrote it out, there was no incident commander. everybody had a hands-on task. And we know from our experience, the incident commander can't have a hands-on task if he's going to run the fire. We always say it's a one-line fire department. If it doesn't go out with that first line, then we're in big trouble. Now, since we've got this automatic aid, we've become a 2 or 3 line fire department that has a much more effective grasp on a house fire because everybody's automatically coming in. They've started training together. They've come up with a area-wide Mayday procedure. They've started doing a lot of cross-referencing of their SOPs and seeing what works out of town, what works in town, and building a cohesive working environment. And that's where the SOPs also need to include, you know, if we always have the same mutual aid or automatic aid coming in, they should be involved. You know, one of the things that they ran into is they had a very large condo fire. And when they got on scene, a very good friend of mine responded as a mutual aid chief. When he got there, nobody had taken accountability. When he started taking accountability, he realized one of the mutual aid towns didn't have their radio frequency. So now everybody, except for these 4 firefighters that responded from a city, a very close city, they weren't able to speak to each other. So it wasn't until they were actually in the firefight before they realized, uh-oh, we have a major communication breakdown here. And they've since went back to the drawing board. From that communication breakdown, we have SOPs in place of when they come in, they're to grab a spare radio, they know where the radios are, and now they have good communication. They've alleviated that problem. But it took a large-scale incident for them to get to that point. Luckily, nothing happened at the large-scale incident that would have, you know, warranted a NIOSH report, but they were able to capitalize on that. So
I think those are great points, and you can see that so far these two they work together: SOPs, SOGs, and communications. And you're going to see, I'm not sure where you're going to go from here in the next one, but I know the list, and they're all intertwined with each other, like a bicycle spoke or a foundation.
Trust me, we can come up with them all that. Where do you want to take it next? There's 3 more that I think are definitely big ones.
Well, I say we go in the train. We'll go in the train. I think that's a natural point to go to, and because if you're going to have SOGs and you're going to have communications, you got to have training. And speaking for somebody in the training division, what I found is, of course, everything is all tied together as the spokes of the wheel, as PJ would say, and you need to try to put all this stuff into your training. A lot of times you'll find training divisions, they take this myopic view, and if they're doing an SCBA research, all they do is that SCBA research of running somebody through the maze, and they don't kind of put anything else into it. So what we tried to do is, the first year I was there, when we got a large department, everybody just went through the maze. So we got them comfortable, you know, created that artificial stress. The next time they got dropped, had to call the Mayday, and we had the chiefs actually answer the Mayday. So now we're getting in the radio communications. Then we had the dispatchers come down and participate in that cycle. Now this year, we're doing the RIT team finds the down firefighter as their SCBA research. They have to put the down firefighter on air, convert the harness, get them up a flight of stairs, and the officer has to update the Mayday. So the officer is using the radio. What we find out a lot of times is, when you look at your training, a lot of departments don't ever have their officers using the radio unless they're on a call. So if you're doing a drill for your firefighters, don't forget the officers, because it goes in with the SOPs and the communications of having them talk to you the way the SOPs are set up. You know, I ask them, are you a RIT group or are you a RIT division? What's the difference? You know, you try to get that out of them first, and now they're communicating, and a lot of the new officers are finding out of, wait a second, I can't have my hands involved because the chief's on the other end asking me annoying questions that I don't really want to answer, and I'm trying to get things done, talk to my crew, but now I got to go talk to this guy. Well, that's your job as the officer. Your hands are on your mic and listening to the radio and communicating with your crew. And what some of our new officers are figuring out, which I really liked, and it wasn't by design, is that you really have to rely on your people, because if you're answering the radio, you can't be the one converting the harness, putting the firefighter on air. So if you don't train your personnel to shine, you kind of lose control of the whole thing. And I've had that happen a couple times, because you're always going to have an informal leader of the group usually step up and say, okay, I'm going to be on the head. We're going to lift them up one stair at a time. The officer's going to be updating it. But the key is of using the SOPs, getting the officer to communicate on the radio, and creating that artificial stress in all of your training things. So I think the key to training is to keep whatever you're training on, make a communications part of it, and then explain the SOP part of it as well, and you kind of bring it all together, and that's what we've been trying to do.
Well, and this takes me into one of the big things that I look at. When I do training, especially with my crew, when I do training, even in the Fire One program, try to keep it realistic. Because what seems to be happening over and over and over again, one of the big complaints that I've gotten from my crew and from other crews all over is, well, they'll have us train with 4 people throwing a 35, but that's never happened on the fire ground. Or we'll train to the SOP that doesn't reflect our, our department. And then when we actually do get on scene, everything breaks down and falls apart. And that goes to, like what you were saying, the communication, all right, working on communication, working on building your people up, and work on the real life scenarios. You can have a RIT drill and have it be real life, okay? You don't throw 15 people at it, you throw 4 at it, okay? You rotate the people through. There's different things that need to be done. And when we write these trainings, whether it's an in-house training or an annual refresher, and I see this more and more, not to point them out, but I do a lot of training with the volunteer services around the state. And one of the things that happens is they get so overwhelmed with required training that they fall very behind in not so required training, but very important training.
The issue that I always see is because your SOGs are a paper document, a lot of instructors feel it needs to be a paper class.
Yes.
A lot of your SOGs should be a hands-on class. Discuss the paper, but get your hands dirty.
Right, here's your objective. Let's go do it.
Correct, and that's the key to success. Make training fun, especially if you're in a larger department. Make training fun. Make it one evolution. Get them in. Set the expectations of this is what we're trying to do. Get them to do it right the first time, or fail without being a failure. Correct it, and then get them out on to the next company. So you rotate them through. A lot of city departments out there and larger departments, the exact opposite of the volunteer thing. They fall into the trap of doing so much with one company or 2 companies that when they look at the year calendar, they realize they're missing half the department. So you gotta keep rotating companies through, and that way you can support the officers.
Right, I agree 100%. One thing, having that eclectic background that I've come to have in the fire service, is some of the smaller departments thrive on training because they don't have the call volume. And that's okay. It's good to have your people training if you don't have the high call volume. For me, it's the complete opposite. I do a 10-hour shift. I'm doing a minimum of 10 calls in that 10 hours. I struggle, and I have 4 rookies, some of whom are 21 years old, and they know that the fire truck used to go by their house, but other than that, they don't really know a lot about the fire service. So I'm starting with square one and trying to fit it in on top of call after call after call. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have departments that don't do a high call volume, and they, like you said, they flood their people with training, and they start to make the training very unrealistic. And they start to add things to the training that they aren't prepared to handle without, say, a mutual aid. It's great if a department wants to do training on building collapse at a structure fire. But if you aren't going to have the resources to handle it, it's like one of the things that we discussed with when I did training with a very small department up north. They aren't going to be their own RIT team. They're the RIT team for the neighboring department. And if they want to worry about the RIT team that's coming into them, they should be bringing in their mutual aid and automatic aid departments to do their RIT team. Their RIT training is for the surrounding towns because they're so small. That's how their SOPs and SOGs are written. So train as if you do, because that kicks in that whole muscle memory, which in a time of need, whether it's a Mayday, down firefighter, firefighter having a medical emergency in an IDH atmosphere, now that muscle memory kicks in and they know how to deal with it properly.
You got to make this training fun.
I agree.
You got to make the training fun. They got to realize that, I always say it's kind of like Discovery Zone for adults. You got to make it fun.
One of the things that I will say is if you're on a Google Hangout and you're watching us right now and you don't see the thousands of cool ideas and videos and everything else between social media, YouTube, Fire Engineering's website, cool ideas of things to do. I mean, I steal stuff from people all the time, and I call it stealing. Frank calls it borrowing. I mean,
Borrowing brilliance. That's what Tom Edison did. He didn't invent the light bulb. He took and built upon it. It's called borrowing brilliance. And that's what the fire service has always been about, is looking what's out there, borrowing it, and putting your experience and knowledge towards it. I mean, look at John Norman, great instructor, great firefighter. His book was based off New York City's earlier SOPs, and then he brought his experience and his judgment to it. So as instructors, we all borrow, and we try to give credit where credit's due, but I don't even know who came up with the word I don't, there's a lot of things out there that get lost to time unless you name it so it has your name on it. Generally, a lot of stuff gets lost on time, but the thing is that we need to train so we can all just do a little bit better. And you got to realize, as the company boss out there, that when it comes time for training, you better be the first one to step up and demonstrate it. And it doesn't matter if you fail, but if you're the guy that sits back because you say you know it all, and then you fail, trust me, they want to just chuck rocks at you all day long. But if you're the one who volunteers and you go down to the training division and there's something to do and you step right up with your crew, I could see the officers who say, oh, I want just the firefighters to do that. No, you're the boss. You're here to work out with them. You need to get that continuity with your crew, but you don't want to be the one that steps back because you're afraid to make a mistake. The only way your crew's going to get a lot out of training is if you're there, willing to be there with them, and your crew needs to know that they can fail without being a failure.
They'll 100% respect that. They can tell.
I'm checking Twitter. So far, no questions. But if you're listening out there and you want to have some input in this conversation, hashtag FETalk. We're monitoring it here, so anything you tag with hashtag FETalk, we'll see. We'll answer your question and bring you into the conversation.
You want to go to ICS? I think that's probably...
Yeah, we could go to ICS because the greatest thing is, like I said, we're 20 years behind, but for 20 years, well, at least 17, the union's been fighting to get incident command. And one of the biggest problems that I see with incident command in this entire country is that there's a lot of chiefs out there that are lying to you, and they say they use incident command, and they're not. New Haven lied for years. They lied to OSHA, they lied to everybody, the union, and we would sit down and say, we don't use incident command. And they would say, yeah, we have a policy on it. We do. Well, no, you're lying. We don't use incident command. So now we do. And now it's the complete opposite. We didn't use it for the last 50 years. We fought to get it in place. And now people are on the flip side saying, oh, well, this is a problem. This is a problem. If you're instituting incident command, know that even if you're a phenomenal department with phenomenal training and phenomenal members, it's going to take you at least 18 months just to get the kinks out, to then figure out exactly how you're going to operate. So we took the fire scope model in New Haven and applied it to New Haven, and I think that it's really working out. It's making our fire ground safer, more effective, more efficient. It's reducing the duplication of effort. It's reducing communications on the radio, but allowing us to actually communicate more on the radio. I don't know if you can...
I agree, and this is where it would, next month when we get Anthony Kastros back, he'll really have so much to contribute to this part of the conversation. And the issue in my department that we struggle with is just the sheer number of people to command a fire. And we're showing up with only 11 with one officer. The chief, the assistant chief, the two deputy chiefs, myself in training, and the fire marshal, we're coming from home if it's after hours. We don't have captains and lieutenants. We have one. We have a battalion chief who's running that whole shift, so he or she has to be command, ends up being operations, ends up being safety, trying to wear all these hats. And also because we only have 10 firefighters, may have to help, chase the kinks, may have to help, throw a ground line, and they end up putting their hands on task because they have to at certain times, and that's just a complete breakdown of command. But they're in a bad spot, and that's in a better situation than from when you originally started, just where there's even less than those 10 firefighters showing up. And sometimes the incident commanders, but if you're putting your hands on a task, you're not commanding that fire. And you should look at maybe putting together a command team. We look at automatic aid and mutual aid to send fire companies for fire attack, for ventilation, for search, for RIT. But how about putting a command team together? So when you have a fire, a confirmed fire in your district, automatic aid from a chief officer from a neighboring town to help start filling those command roles.
One of the things that I've talked to a lot of chief officers in these smaller departments that rely on automatic aid, they don't want to send their people out of town without a chief officer going with them, and I think that holds some weight.
Because that gives you a division officer. Or gives you a
as
safety
soon as you
officer
get
right
there,
off the
that's
bat.
your accountability, your safety, your your operations officer, and if you're training together and you understand what they want, you understand what they are talking about on the radio, what their expectations are, and who else is coming in, you've worked together, it makes everything flow much easier. Goes back to the training again, doing it
Training,
beforehand.
communication, everybody's got to be on the same sheet of music.
Exactly.
This August will be 2-year anniversary of the plane crash we had in East Haven, New Haven line. We not only had companies from East Haven and our whole department there, we had companies from New Haven, representatives from the airport because we're less than a half mile from the airport property. So then you have all the acronym services coming in, the alphabet soup coming in. We have Branford Fire Department coming in for mutual aid. We had North Branford covering mutual aid for town, and we have never practiced our command structure together. It worked, but it was a lot of face-to-face stuff. It worked. We were lucky that we do some work with the fire department because of the airport. We do an annual drill. 3 years in a row, we do a tabletop, and every other year, every 4 years, we do the full-scale exercise. So that helped, but yet we've never sat down and actually worked on just the command process or the ICS.
And here's the city of New Haven. You know, here we're the big brother in a sense. We're the city, and we were the only we were the hub, and yet our language on the radio was totally different than all the smaller departments that surround us. So now we finally figured that we got to grow up a little, and now our language is the same. So New Haven used to use side 1, side 2, side 3. Now we're moving to Alpha Bravo, Charlie Delta.
And you've learned that from incidents, but yet we have still now, you and I in the training division in 2 bordering towns, and we have yet to work together on that. So that's even a failure between us that we need to do a better job at. We're no different from any other fire department out there. We're not perfect. It's nationwide. We're not perfect, but we border each other, and we've gone to incidents together. You know what I mean? We've gone to major incidents. We've also gone to some smaller incidents that are on the border. And we need to do a better job at that ourselves.
Well, and this takes me into my next part of the incident command system, which is we need to get away from some of the old traditions of the chief is the person who has to be in charge. This is big still in the volunteer service. One of the volunteer services I was just talking to recently said that their elections of officers is still a popularity contest. There's no structure to it. It's somebody is voted to be the chief, somebody's voted to be the captain, first lieutenant, and second lieutenant.
And it's not just the volunteers, though. There's career departments out there where merit doesn't matter, and it just depends whether you're the mayor's best friend. So really, it's the Volunteer Association of America, and if I'm mispronouncing it, I apologize, and the International Association of Fire Chiefs and the International Association of Firefighters. They really let down everybody because those 3 organizations really need to get on the same page and say that people in positions matter and that they have to be trained to a standard. And what you're saying about the incident command system is so true. You need to realize that the incident command system is a management system, and it's not about rank, it's about function.
Right.
So as a lieutenant, you could actually be a division officer. As a chief, you could be a safety officer, division officer, a sector officer. So you got to realize that it comes down to function. And then once you put those people into function, then change their radio signal to designate what their function is, and then you'll get better understanding in the fire ground.
We struggle. We don't have officers. We run 2 firefighters per piece. There's a driver and there's a rider. And I train them. I discuss it with them. We go over it, but I can't get it through to some of them. If you're riding the front seat, I don't care that you have no rank. When you arrive first due, you give a size up, you're in charge. I don't care if you have 1 month on the job or 20 years on the job. If you're first there, you give your size up, you give your radio port based on your SOPs, your SOGs, and you take command. Somebody has to be in charge. Somebody has to make those initial calls.
We need somebody to blame. So if you're in the front seat, you're the guy or the girl.
And no better if you've only been on a couple months. You're the easy target.
Yeah, so incident command as a whole, it needs to go back to structure. It needs to have an SOP or an SOG. It needs to be trained on, and it needs to be communicated to everybody who's in charge. If there's an operations officer, if there's a division officer, who are they? Where are they going to be? And there needs to be a fluid system. And it can't be about pride getting in the way of I'm in charge because I have the most time, I have the most horns, or I'm the only one here with a white helmet. There needs to be structure.
And I'll also caution our listeners out there, or viewers, that a lot of departments think that the incident command system is I'm going to put everybody through NIMS 100, 200, 700, 600, 800, and then they're all going to be able to mitigate and move this alphabetical soup around, and it doesn't work. You have to And I'll recommend FireScope because it's working for us. You do need those classes, those NIMS classes, but then you need to be able to take all of that and kind of put it in a 3-page, 4-page document of how your department's going to actually operate. So therefore, once you reach saturation of that document on the big, huge incident where you have all the resources coming down, you'll have the knowledge to expand it. But if you don't have that 3 or 4-page SOP on how you're going to apply the incident command system to your everyday operations, you're setting yourself up to fail. And,
I agree.
Just because you got 300, 400, 500, 600, 700 doesn't mean that your department's using incident command. Are you using it on every call, and how are you using it, and is everybody on the same page? And that has to be communicated in a different SOP, and usually it's going to be probably 3 pages of substance and a couple pages of terminology so everybody understands what the terminology is.
I think that's a big one too, is getting away from the jargon-specific town, cities. A piece in the Northeast is different from a wagon, and you need to be specific with the terminology because for us in New Haven, we attract people from all over the country to come and work for our department. The other day,
Justin McCarthy teaches at FDIC.
Exactly,
they're all blocking
it. Well, from everyone. One of the kids came in the other day, brand new kid, worked in D.C. for a little while. Walked in and he goes, "Am I riding the wagon?" And I turn around and all I could picture was the old red wagon because that's his terminology. But our department doesn't structure things with this specific terminology, and I think that could cause a communication breakdown. And that's something that if it's an issue in your department, you might need to rectify it because it could lead to breakdown further on in the scene.
Well, this goes back to communication, incident command, and SOPs and SOGs. Is that you have to realize that just because we want through NIMS to use plain language, it doesn't mean that you need 6 different terms to describe the same thing. So yes, you want plain language, but certain things that your department responds to, for example, it's common for us to have a 2.5 wood boom frame house. It shouldn't be described 8 different ways. A 2.5 wood is a 2.5 wood. A 3 wood flat roof brace frame construction should be described kind of the same way. It shouldn't be, a 3 wood post and beam. Yes, it's plain language, but now we're getting we're splitting hairs. So everybody should be describing things the same way. So I think an SOP policy, a size-up policy, is very critical. And in this one's Fire Engineering July, Sam Villani and I wrote an article based on New Haven's SOPs, which we borrowed a little brilliance from Anthony Avillo and North Hudson's SOPs on how to standardize your initial report and the battalion chief's report on the radio to get the most out of it.
You want to paint a portrait, not an abstract.
Right. Oh, I like that.
There you go.
I like that.
Nice. I know you want to probably get to the last topic.
Yes.
The last topic that we've discussed, or that we are going to discuss, is coordinated attack. And I know this hits home with PJ, but it hits home everywhere. If you go online right now, you look at Vinnie Vents a lot, you look at the line placement, you look at any of it, without coordinated attack, we have a breakdown. This goes back to our SOPs. I know in our department, in the order that the companies are dispatched, or they fall on the box card, that's how they fall into their SOP assignment. Okay? Different departments do it different ways, but no matter what, there needs to be coordination. And I think that when there's a breakdown of coordination, whether it's improper ventilation or whatever it is, it leads to a breakdown of everything.
And this has been probably one of the hardest things for our department to change. Because for so long, we're a combination department, we hired our volunteers. So you started like myself as an explorer, then joined the volunteer ranks, and you came up into the career department. So you knew your job. You went to work, you went to a fire, you knew if you were riding engine 1 or if you were driving engine 4 or you on the rescue, you knew what you had to do. So the incident commander wouldn't have to give that real direct guidance and direction because it was so small and everybody just went to work and knew what they needed to do. But now, as times have changed and we're now running an ALS service, we have to look outside of our immediate community, and we're hiring a lot of paramedic firefighters who are coming from all over the state, right, that some of them don't have no fire gun experience. The battalion chiefs have had to learn that they need to give specific guidance and choreograph fire ground more. And you know what? We got away with it for years because there wasn't as much necessity on having to coordinate the fire ground. Whenever the roof got open, the roof got open. Whenever water went on the fire went out. Whenever the search got done, the search got done. But now, because of the building construction and the contents and the speed that fire is growing and the speed that fire is reaching this vent limited stage, that if we're not coordinating, if we don't have somebody going back to your incident command, standing out front of the building, calling the shots and making sure each and every piece is coordinated, we're going to injure firefighters, we're going to kill firefighters. And this has been a big hurdle and stumbling growing pains for our department because the battalion chiefs that are currently working came up through the system. They all started as volunteers and came up through the system. They've been on 20, almost 25 plus years. But now they grew up as battalion chiefs not having to give that guidance. But in the last 5 years, things have changed so much. They're having to relearn their jobs on the fire ground to help coordinate our fire ground because it's just not happening like it was by chance before.
But a lot of it, too, is we've seen senior members who are invaluable and officers who, over the years, have made ventilation like an art. You know, like when I take a window and when I don't take a window with no rhyme or reason to the art. It's very simple. You don't break a window. Let's go with horizontal ventilation. If you apply these rules, you can never go wrong. There's no mystery to ventilation or horizontal ventilation. You always want to start at the fire and work your way back. You never want to take a window until the line's flowing water on the main body of fire. So our SOP in New Haven is if you see or hear signs of extinguishment, you can break the window in the fire room. If you're ordered to by the engine company boss who's making the line, or ordered to by the IC. So if you follow that, you can't go wrong. Because what we see on YouTube is guys come up, Vinny Ventilata, as Justin was saying, he takes out the front glass as the line's going in. Next thing you know, you see everybody rolling out. It's no mystery, and I think that people do that is because firefighters have mystified it of when they vent. It's very simple. Start at the fire, wait until they're flowing water, take it, and then wait for the change, and then move your way back.
As we'll make another point, we'll get to Justin. I think, if you look at, we have bailout training today. Why? Did we have bailout training 30 years ago? No. We're not coordinating our fire ground, and that's why we're forcing people to bail out of windows or bail out of our fire buildings because we're not coordinating it well enough today because the fire ground has changed so much, but we haven't changed as incident commanders. Not nationally, but there are certain departments in certain places that we haven't changed the way we're managing our incidents, and we're not coordinating the tasks. So we're putting firefighters in bad spots, and now we have to have bailout training instead of fixing the problem of command, communicating, policies and procedures or SOGs and training on them.
Right.
Now we have to, let's fix the problem by creating, bailout devices and bailout training, but we're still not fixing the problem of coordinating our fire.
I was always a big bailout training, bailout kit, bailout harness guy until I started to really do some evaluation. And you realize that if you're bailing out of a window, there's been a catastrophic failure.
On all levels, command,
everywhere. And we're spending thousands of dollars on bailout kits. We're spending thousands of dollars on bailout training and research, when really it goes right back to the 5 things that we just discussed. Following proper communication, SOPs, training, listening to the incident commander and having a good structure, and then coordinating it all together so that the wheel or the foundation can expand from there. That's how we're always trained in the past, my father's era, to put a fire out. You listen to your officer. You let them know what's going on. And these are the days of the air packs in a box in the back seat. We've since become so good at our craft and being able to go in. Technology's made it so good that certain things, we started to lose the basis of certain things. And, unfortunately, this is where we've come, as bailout kits and bailout training, when we should be doing more fundamental things of listening to the SOPs and having SOPs that reflect our operation. If we put this all together, we alleviate a significant amount of our problems.
Right, and for a lot of departments out there, if you're not going to call the resources you need to coordinate the fire ground, save your taxpayers some money. Don't put in for that new shiny ladder truck. Put in for a bulldozer, because you're an exterior fire department.
Right, extra master streams.
Extra master streams and a good loader will get you wherever you want to go. because you're not going to save somebody who's unconscious inside if you're not going to coordinate the fire ground. And no unconscious person has ever been saved in America by a crew standing outside. So if we coordinate the fire ground, and there's a lot of different ways, and we'll have another show just strictly on ventilation, but remember, there's rules to ventilation. It's not an art. It's a science. So if you coordinate it correctly and you wait until water's applied, you're all set. For the roof, I'll just leave off with the roof. Normally, 99% of the time, the crews, the simple coordination is they're going up and they're just chopping or cutting the hole, the highest point over the fire, because it coordinates naturally on the time. However, if the engine company is delayed in putting water on the fire, or the fire is ventilation limited, and the building's choked with smoke, you can cut your hole, but don't drop the ceiling until they have water on the fire. And the old method of, in a tenement or even a 3-story building with the skylight on top of the stairs, when I was first on the truck, we used to get to the roof and immediately tap on the frame, let everybody know the glass is coming down, count to 15 and take it in. Now we're kind of changing that. If the fire's ventilated limited, wait until the crew has water on the fire, then tap on the frame and bring it in. But ventilation has rules, and PJ will shoot out our article on keeping it rich. So, but I think that it's, remember, there's no politician on scene that says you can't call for the resources you need when you need it. So pick up the radio. You wear the gold badge for a reason. Or in New Haven, now they wear silver. They're silly like that. Just pick up the radio and call for the help, because everybody wants to go to your fire. And make sure that you're hitting the NIOSH 5. And this week, this month, or next month, sit down at the table with all your bosses and write a line of duty death report. Have everybody do it without communicating with each other of what they think the failures would be. And guess what? I don't need a government program to tell us where we're failing. We all know where we're failing. We all need to do a better job. Justin?
Oh, without a doubt. I think these are the most crucial things in the fire service, and they encompass everything. But if we just tackle them one at a time, really hit home, and we stay focused, we can do a lot of really good things out there, no matter where you are, no matter what your staffing is, no matter how busy or slow your call volume is.
PJ, last word of the day. Chris Pepler, we're all thinking about you.
Get better, Chris.
Chris, best wishes, brother. We're sending our prayers. Justin and Frank, this is a great conversation. I think we could have taken each one of the Fatal 5 and talked about just one of those, because there's so much that we can learn. I think we've given some good tips and tricks and things that, you know, everybody
Kastros, we miss you.
Watching can go back and you know, study and learn on within their departments. I think this is great. So I thank Fire Engineering, Fire Rescue, Fire Nation, Chief Hall, and Eric Roden for giving us this opportunity, this platform today. And we look forward to next month.
Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. We're out.